Well, welcome everybody to session 16B of the World Academy of Arts and Sciences online assembly. And I'm sure if you've been participating in various other sessions that you've been having some very interesting conversations and dialogue. And we hope to continue that with this session. My name is Alyn WARE. I'm a founder of Parliamentarians for Nuclear Non-Proliferation and Disarmament, and also the Program Officer for the World Federalist Movement Institute for Global Policy, and also Program Officer for the World Future Council. And all three organisations will be very active in the topic of this panel today, which is from competitive nationalism to global common security. We have some wonderful speakers here to introduce the topic and then have some discussion in the 50 minutes that we've got. Just a little overview of the topic first, and then I'll introduce the speakers. So the idea moving from competitive nationalism to global common security is an idea that's wedded in the UN Charter, which was established with the principal objective to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, but to do that with a very practical approach to international relations, and in particular the resolution of international conflicts through conflict resolution mechanisms, through the role of law, and through emphasizing the importance of diplomacy, mediation, negotiation, arbitration. So these are the approaches and tools of common security. We have them already in existence, but they're not sufficiently used. So part of the discussion today is how can we elevate these? How can we ensure that countries turn more to the common security mechanism to resolve conflicts peacefully, rather than competitive nationalism and military security, which so often leads towards armed conflict and catastrophe. So that's enough of the introduction from me. And I'll just check that we have our speakers here. So the speakers we have today is David CHIKVAIDZE, who's Vice President of the Swiss Forum for International Affairs and the former Chef de Cabinet of the Director General of the United Nations Office in Geneva. We also have Donato Pasigli, who's Vice President of the World Academy of Arts and Sciences, Vice President for Social Sciences and Humanities, and also the World Academy of Arts and Sciences representative to the UN in Geneva. We also have Rebecca Shute, who's co-chair of the Impact Coalition on Strengthening International Judicial Institutions. And we have Bertylle DUFOREST, who's policy researcher and analyst for the World Future Council. And we're thankful to also have the services of Arthur DUFOREST, who's the Disarmament and Conflict Prevention Consultant for the Inter-Parliamentary Union, and Arthur will be serving as a rapporteur. So that's a bit of the introduction. So for the opening rounds, if the speakers can keep to around about 7 minutes, 8 minutes max if you need to, in order to explore, what are some of the approaches and what are the common security, how that can replace competitive military security, what are the initiatives that are taking this forward, what's the possibilities, are they effective, the possibilities of success. These are some of the issues to explore in your opening presentation of around about 7 minutes. So I'll turn first to David. David, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alyn. Good to see you. Good to see everybody. And pleasure to be in this very important panel, because it's something that I've been thinking about and I've spoken often. Let me start with an anecdote. Back when I was serving in New York in the early 2000s, a small delegation of political leaders just before their election was meeting in a foundation and strongly arguing in favor of more military support for their party, their country. And during the Q&A, I said, could you please elaborate what elements go into national security in your view? I had to ask the question 3 times and then to explain what I was asking, because they didn't get the joke. It was no joke. And the whole point and the problem is that this is humankind's knee-jerk reaction, that the way you look at national security is in military terms. There's a famous quote by Churchill in his biography of the Duke of Marlborough that, let me read it, battles are the principal milestones in human history. So it was then, so it is now. But why is that? It is because that is our instinct. And, you know, in order to try to find a remedy, we need to look at how it ebbs and flows, because there have been times when even the strongest and most belligerent of nations were looking at diplomacy, looking at cooperation, looking at the multilateral approach. But when we look at this, these basically, let me say, positive moments, we still see that it was based on the national interest as perceived by those countries, where we're talking about cooperation during World War II, you know, détente, if you will, whatever. It is that nations consider that it is in their interest to go down that way, that road, instead of picking up, used to be sticks and stones, now it's missiles, bombs, and drones, and increasingly. So, but the nature hasn't changed. Look, I mean, forget, we always talk about America, Russia, China, but look at Cambodia and Thailand just right now. I mean, why can't they discuss this? Why do these things flare up? Why does it never end in between Pakistan and India? Because nations, history shows, will move to the cooperative side when they feel either obliged to, under some very big danger, or they think it's in their national interest. Now, the problem is, for us, is that this grave danger, we can no longer afford, we as humanity can no longer afford to go down that road of brinkmanship and use this lever to engage ourselves in a more cooperative approach. So essentially, we are like alcoholics or you know, substance abusers. There's no real ability to wean us off of this by sweet talking. It is a disease, and it is part of human DNA. However, it does not follow from what I'm saying that we have to lay down our arms and not do anything. We have to continue arguing for this, advocating for diplomacy, for peace. What we are looking at, the global peace offensive. What does that mean? That means that we need to basically hold hands and speak, if not with one voice, but into the same direction. That way, which is, as I said, I believe it's in our DNA of humankind, that is not the only way to go. And we have to use the good examples and the interesting directions that could play to the national interest. We have to demonstrate that the national interest can be achieved by other means.
Thank you very much, Dave. A very good start on sort of principles. And hopefully as we move along, we'll also build on those and also come out with some more of the concrete examples that you alluded to in your comments, because there are many examples of this working. And part of, I think, in exploring common security is to highlight where it has been working and emulate those, or build from them, or be inspired by them, and also learn from the mistakes, you know, where things haven't been working. So getting concrete on this is something which is really important. I know some of the subsequent speakers are going to be talking about some concrete examples of common security in action. So we'll now turn to Donato, but just before I give the floor to Donato, just to remind the people in the audience that if you've got questions of the panelists, please put them in the Q&A box, which you'll see at the bottom of your screen, about like 2/3 along from the left. And then we will ask the panelists the questions after the initial round of presentations. So, Donato, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alyn. It's a pleasure to be with you and with so many friends, David, and all the others I can see right now, others that will listen in later on to our discussion. Let me say, first of all, there is no dichotomy between common security and human security. We went through that, Alyn. You remember the exercises we have done not too long ago for the IPU, the Inter-Parliamentary Union, that put our minds together in order to reconcile the two approaches. Of course, one, common security, derives from the Olof Palme Commission, the conclusions that stated that practically the idea that nations and populations can only be truly safe if their counterparts also feel secure. So that was the major shift in terms of understanding what security means among states. But at the same time, actually a few years later, one of the geniuses of the past century, Boutros Ghali, that some officials at the United Nations probably did not get so well along with, but that was absolutely a first-class official, had the brilliant idea of developing the Agenda for Peace. That was in 1992. In 1993, a year later, he realized that there was a missing link. That missing link was the human security angle. That is when they tell you that it was a UNDP report that brought the human security at the highest level, it's totally wrong. This at least is my personal interpretation, my personal views, but I have the evidence of that because I was fortunate enough to be called into the office of Boutros Ghali those days and read actually the very first versions of the Agenda for Peace and its subsequent editions. So what Boutros Ghali meant, Secretary General of the United Nations at that time, was, well, there is an element that relates to people. People are not necessarily states, are about the needs of people. What are the opportunities that they have? What are the basic needs? What are the aspirations of people? So this needs to be reflected. And now we know that there was an evolution in terms of positive peace, affirming the principle of positive peace later on. All the peace studies have, of course, factored that in. But we owe it to that particular milestone, I would say, the Agenda for Peace of the Secretary General, that went through several iterations, as we know, later on, but the only very good one is the original one. Now, we are at a stage, of course, that all these studies should be re-examined. We are doing also at the World Academy a reassessment. I started personally with the idea of the peace offensive over a year ago, when I revisited also my personal experiences and realized that, again, the personal relations, the relations with the people that need assistance, with the people that we can advise at some point as international civil servants at the time I was. I mean, what is the result of all that? The result is, first of all, that we have to understand we are not the actors. We are the ones that can facilitate processes, and we should be conscious of that. There are no real, except there are some exceptional figures, of course, but there are no exceptional mediators or negotiators that can do the deal themselves. It's about people, it's about relations, it's about human relations. So the whole, let's say, re-examination of my personal experiences through development, through peacekeeping, through policies, you know, and the whole issues that I've been dealing with in so many years at the United Nations and beyond, I realized that we need to really look into the potential of helping, facilitating dialogue, also at the micro level. If we really want to make a change in perceptions, a cultural change, we cannot just think in terms of grand schemes. The grand schemes don't necessarily work. We have to be extremely patient and collaborate as much as we can with the real actors on the ground that may need some advice, may need some facilitation in order to meet up, in order to focus on issues, on problem solving, on what is really necessary for them to advance and to make peace also with whoever they're dealing with. There are so many conflicts in the world, but we cannot just limit ourselves to the surface. We really need to have a deep dive into the real problems, and whether this, you call it public diplomacy, you can call it scientific diplomacy, you can call it cultural diplomacy. There are many means in order to interact with people, build bridges, and also diffuse tension. The diffusion of tension, again, does not happen overnight. It's a long-term process. So it needs that you have to do a gradual approach, a gradual, let's say, reduction of tensions. As a good thinker of the 60s, Charles Osgood, was predicated. Osgood was a contemporary of Morgenthau, was a contemporary of Cyrus Zoppo, was a contemporary of those who were really looking into solutions for the arms race. So now, since we are talking about the arms race, I understand this is also the topic of this conversation. Well, they were already thinking in the 60s, that was, of course, the time of the Cuba crisis, that we needed to reduce tensions. Of course, you reduce tensions through high-level meetings, you reduce tensions with relations at the highest level, but also through the one-on-one personal relations that you can establish at different levels, in different fields. So it's true, the playing field is not always the same, but we have to have different entry points. So through the peace offensive, and my friend David CHIKVAIDZE just evoked, we are looking into different entry points, and we are geared to present, let's say, different specialties and different capacities of individuals that are going to assist processes at a country level primarily. So my real, let's say, re-examination, as I said, or re-evaluation of past experiences brought me to believe that if we really want to move on in terms of achieving peace, common security, human security, first of all, we have to reassess what the basic needs are. What are the basic understanding that people have of what is security for them? And then also work with those who need assistance, who need cooperation, also because, you know, ultimately we need also to rebuild a right-based system and cooperation, international cooperation, that is the foundation of the United Nations charters, that is the foundation of whatever we have sensically created in the Second World War aftermath. That is really a system not just of balances, check and balances, a system of mutual cooperation. So if we want to really reconsider the way we can go in terms of building peace, we have to play really with those who offer those opportunities, study those opportunities, and provide services that are really needed. That can be, as I said, facilitation in some cases, scientific advice, cultural advice, support at different levels. This is where we have to start from. And in that sense, we are building a coalition in over a year, probably now, but we have now so many organizations that have signed up to the principles of the peace offensive. I wanted just to give you an overview also where the idea of the peace offensive comes from. Thank you.
Thank you so much, because you're exploring some of the dynamics, of diplomacy as part of our common security, but also the interactions between human security and common security. And both, of course, are very rooted in the United Nations. Common security very much in the UN Charter, Articles 2 and Chapter 6 on peaceful resolution of conflicts, and human security very much in the human rights, environmental protection, sustainable development goals, and that they intersect. They're very interconnected. So we're going to move on now. I think Rebecca, our next speaker, is going to talk a little bit about the judicial institutions. And we've just been watching yesterday an incredible decision from the International Court of Justice, which had elements of both human security and common security very much, on the obligations of states with regards to climate change. The court coming down with, a duty on states to have to cooperate to resolve this, which is a common obligation. There are probably other things that Rebecca has got to talk about as well. So Rebecca, the floor is yours, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Alyn, and thank you to the World Academy of Arts and Sciences and to the distinguished panelists. It's an honor to be in your company. And yes, I am going to use at least my initial intervention to try to respond to some very late-breaking news that I think recognizes the pivotal moment that we're at, a moment that is marked by cascading crises that know no borders. From the intensifying climate impacts to pandemic shocks, economic inequality, and the spread of authoritarianism, I think we must recognize today that the world faces profound risks that no single nation can solve alone. And so while for decades, the international system has been shaped by a logic of competitive nationalism, a system in which states seek to maximize their relative gains, defend their sovereignty jealously, and measure success by advantage over others, this is a worldview that's embedded in our security doctrines, foreign policies, and even much of our academic literature, but it is faltering. This framework is proving inadequate and actually dangerously so in the face of challenges that are transnational by nature. And these are not threats that respect borders and can be mitigated through zero-sum competition. So what we need, and what must be theorized, institutionalized, and practiced, is a shift to global common security. And so yesterday, this vision gained a very powerful legal affirmation. The International Court of Justice's advisory opinion offers a landmark legal and moral framework to support the shift. So just a little bit of background, because my time is limited. This was requested by the UN General Assembly unanimously at the urging of small island states. And the opinion addresses the obligations of states in responding to the climate crisis. I would argue this has been one of the most important jurisprudential developments of our time, and a profound and specific relevance to our discussion today on common security. And while maybe we'll get in the discussion to other mechanisms for a shift to a new multilateralism, including the Pact for the Future, I'm going to stick my initial intervention around the significance of the AO, the advisory opinion, with the caveat that it's been less than 24 hours since it was published. So please forgive me if there has been a limited amount of time to digest and analyze adequately. So the court held that states have obligations, I'm going to quote here, under international law to take all necessary measures to ensure the protection of the climate system consistent with the enjoyment of human rights, including the rights to life, health, food, water, housing, and a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. What's really critical is that these are not merely aspirational goals. These are legal obligations that bind all states, and they constitute positive duties derived both from customary international law as well as human rights treaties and the UN Charter itself. And crucially, the court emphasized that these obligations must be carried out cooperatively. So preventing transboundary environmental harms requires, in the court's words, sustained and continuous forms of cooperation. So this framing dismantles any pretense that states can address global threats through unilateral or transactional approaches. And the opinion sets out a legal architecture for cooperative sovereignty, which is a concept that I think we may need to theorize more rigorously in the years to come in light of the opinion. So why does this matter for our theme? I'd like the audience and participants to consider three core messages from the court. So first, climate change is a common concern requiring collective care. So the ICJ reiterated that under Article 1 of the UN Charter, states must achieve international cooperation in solving international problems, with climate foremost among them. And the court views environmental protection and climate action as customary international law, which is a duty that binds every state regardless of its treaty membership. And the implication of this is that no country can go it alone, that meaningful progress demands shared responsibility, technology transfer, financial support, and joint planning, all explicitly mentioned in the court's opinion. And this is the essence of global common security. So the second takeaway, the prevention of transboundary harm demands cooperation. So states must not only prevent environmental harm themselves, but must also, quote, cooperate with each other in good faith to prevent significant harm to the climate system and other parts of the environment, which requires sustained and continuous forms of cooperation. So in this sense, cooperation is not optional. It is integral to preserving global security, human rights, and ecological stability. Thirdly, inaction may constitute wrongful acts with consequences. So the ICJ held that failure to curb emissions, regulate fossil fuel subsidies, or sufficiently protect vulnerable populations can be legally wrongful, opening the door to reparations and litigation. And although the opinion itself is advisory and non-binding, this significantly raises the stakes, reframing climate negligence as going from a political choice to a legal obligation. I'd also like to briefly underscore four principles that are instructional for a common security approach. Firstly, that climate change is a human rights emergency. The court's opinion makes one thing resoundingly clear: the climate crisis is undermining the most fundamental rights of people around our globe. And that competitive nationalism has fueled a race to extract, consume, and pollute, where the rich pollute the most, but the poor suffer first and worst. And the ICJ challenges this model and insists on a different one of solidarity, cooperation, and reparation. The second principle is the legal duty to cooperate. The third is that human rights are at the heart of global security. Perhaps most significant for this audience is the way that ICJ weaves together environmental protection and international human rights law. The AO affirms that states not only must avoid causing harm, but must protect the human rights of populations affected by climate change. So in effect, I'm wrapping up, this opinion expands the zone of accountability. And that's holding that states must take into account the global and intergenerational effects of their actions. And so moving forward, from competition to collective care, in a sense, we must look at the ICJ's opinion not just as a legal document, but as a mirror that reflects who we are as a global community and what we can become. It's not an abstraction, it's a juridical, political, and ethical imperative. Thank you so much. I know I'm over time, Alyn.
Thank you, Rebecca. That was an incredible summary, and not everything from the decision of the court. There's a lot of other things to be pulled from this decision, which was very comprehensive. It took an hour and a half for the president and the judge to read it out, and not going into all the sources of law. That was just laying out what is the basis, what is the framework, what are the specific obligations. But more than that, this was also something which was led by youth from the world in the beginning, joining in with like-minded states, a real movement. And it was a cooperative movement. It was people from different nationalities, from different backgrounds, from different experiences, all coming together with a common cause, which is very much part of this common security framework. So the very campaign was living this. And then the court sort of amplified it and laid down the legal basis for this. So I'm really excited by this. Of course, this is not the only case from the International Court of Justice. There are other ones. The International Court of Justice is not the only judicial institution, but this is a very inspiring one. And thank you so much, Rebecca, for highlighting this.
And Alyn, just to underscore the points that you made, this went from a movement led by 19 students from the University of the Pacific Islands to only the 5th unanimous advisory opinion in almost 80 years of the juridical history of the International Court of Justice, the world's highest court. So thank you. It's been an honor.
Thank you. Now we're going to move to Bertylle, who I think is going to be talking about some specific examples of policies which reflect some of this. And I think this might answer the question or the comment that Rajendra put in the chat saying, are there countries or are there good foreign policies? And the World Future Council actually looks for those, asks researchers, asks for people to nominate them for a policy award, which Bertylle is going to talk about. And I think you're going to get examples of a couple of the winners of that reflect common security policy framework. So Bertylle, the floor is yours.
No, that's right, Alyn, and thank you so much. And thank you to the other panelists as well for your thoughtful reflections and contributions. I'm just quickly going to share my screen with you so you can follow along with a little presentation. So I just thought of briefly introducing the organization first. So the World Future Council, based in Hamburg, is composed of 50 outstanding global change makers from civil society, science, politics, and business, all dedicated to safeguarding the rights of future generations. And since 2007, we've been working on identifying top future just policies and to advance their implementation and dissemination. One of our key programs is the World Future Policy Award, which highlights inspiring, innovative, and effective laws and policies rather than actual individuals. And each year, the award focuses on a topic where urgent progress is the most needed. In 2024, in partnership with the Basel Peace Office, the Geneva Center for Security Policy, and the Inter-Parliamentary Union, our 13th award cycle was dedicated to peace and future generations. And I had the pleasure of actually being part of the research team. And from our 47 nominations across 29 countries, we identified many outstanding examples of how peace and security can be strengthened through nonviolent conflict resolution and peace building using effective diplomacy, inclusive mediation, and locally rooted solutions. So among all these policies are very powerful real-world examples of how common security principles can be translated into effective governance and practices. And I'll be quick, but I would like to highlight 3 of our finalist policies that really exemplify how governments and communities around our world are really strengthening peace and security and preventing or reversing arms races through commitment, courage, and collaboration. I want to start with the Bougainville peace process. Some of you might know it. It's a very powerful example of regional cooperation and trust-led peace building supported by the New Zealand-led Pacific Partnership for Peace, which offers a uniquely successful model of common security through cooperation, culturally based conflict resolution, and trust. And in the face of a devastating civil war in which 10% of Bougainville population was lost and no end was actually in sight, New Zealand initiated a new approach in 1997, leading to a successful peace process. It facilitated a light intervention model that prioritized cultural sensitivity, inclusivity, and local ownership of a peace process. And this began with what they call the Birmingham Talks, hosted by New Zealand, which brought together formerly opposing sides. The resulting agreement was supported by a truce monitoring group led by New Zealand again, which also included personnel from Fiji and Vanuatu with Australian logistical support. This is again a true example of regional cooperation and common security. There were around 300 monitors that worked in small unarmed teams embedded in communities, building reports through daily interactions, and the whole process respected traditional reconciliation practices and including diverse voices. And for the first time, Bougainvillean women played a really strong key role in shaping the peace process on the ground. So that was one example. But wait, before I finish, the results was again a locally led ceasefire that has held for 28 years and looks set to last. the drafting of a Bougainvillean constitution and the establishment of an autonomous Bougainville government in 2005, and a peaceful independence referendum in 2019 with 97.7% voting in favor. I'll turn now to Costa Rica on a national level. With Costa Rica's abolition of the army and affirmation of active neutrality, which really shows how a country can prioritize and achieve peace through diplomacy, constitutional and international law, and social investment. So Costa Rica abolished its army in 1948 and made this part of its constitution. Since then, it has reaffirmed its commitment to peace and neutrality through official declarations and Supreme Court rulings, including a 1983 Neutrality Proclamation and a 2014 Declaration of Peace as a human right. In its regional and international relations, Costa Rica replaced its reliance on military security with a reliance on common security, using diplomacy, common security bodies and mechanisms, including the UN and the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. So Costa Rica has, of course, resolved a number of disputes with its neighbors at the International Court of Justice, including one in response to an armed conflict or armed invasion of Costa Rican territory, and played a central role in the Central American peace process. It has also led a number of UN peace and disarmament initiatives, including the Arms Trade Treaty, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and the UN Declaration on the Right to Peace. Its neutrality, diplomacy, and promotion of the rule of law have really fostered regional stability, democracy, and a culture of peace. So for this third example, I want us to turn to a grassroots initiative from the Philippines involving highly effective mediation, conflict resolution, and a holistic environmental peace building, which is called the CHIKVAIDZE From Arms to Farms program. And to invite you to the inspiring world of CHIKVAIDZE, I would like us to watch a short video. So I hope this will work. Please let me know if you can hear it.
We use food as a tool for peace. It became the Arms to Farms program.
CHIKVAIDZE, Philippines. Once scarred by violence, insecurity, and distrust, caught in the crossfire of long-standing conflict between the Moro Islamic Liberation Front and local government forces. By 2010, poverty and hunger gripped 80% of the population. A bold new approach was needed. In response, Mayor Rommel Anado launched From Arms to Farms, a program rooted in peace-building and sustainable development. It gave over 5,000 former combatants a fresh start, turning fighters into farmers.
Along the way, we figure out that addressing poverty and hunger will lead to sustainable peace and order. Oh, the real peace is when people is working from the heart.
Training in organic farming, financial literacy, and conflict resolution tackled the root causes of poverty and division. Community dialogues brought together Christian and Muslim residents, fostering collaboration and trust. The results are remarkable. Since 2012, CHIKVAIDZE has reported no armed conflict-related crimes. Over 6,000 hectares of land now provide food security and economic stability. All 13 of CHIKVAIDZE's villages have become 100% organic. Under Mayor Anado's leadership, CHIKVAIDZE's poverty rate has dropped from 80% to just over 9%, earning recognition as the most innovative, efficient, and sustainable city in the Philippines. From Arms to Farms is now inspiring similar initiatives across the Philippines and beyond. CHIKVAIDZE proves that integrated solutions can bring lasting peace and prosperity to conflict-affected regions, benefiting current and future generations.
There we go. So yes, this is truly a really great example, and it really reflects key values of common security and also human security to some extent, resolving conflict through cooperation, enabling inclusive development, fostering reintegration through mutual trust rather than coercion. I'll make my concluding points here. These three cases, I think, really remind us that lasting security doesn't really come from arms or dominance, but from cooperation rooted in law, culture, and trust, and also shaped and led by the communities that are mostly effective. And other effective and sustainable policy that resolve conflict or prevent war do already exist. And they, of course, are critical for both humanity and the planet. They're often not well known or too few, but I hope those were at least inspiring for you. And if you want to explore these examples amongst others further, you can scan the QR code you see on the screen here, and then you'll find our brochure, our videos of our other winning policies, and some additional resources. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bertylle. And I also put the link in the chat if people didn't manage to bring their smartphone out in time to catch the QR code. Thank you very much to all four speakers. Really interesting range of approaches and comments on this. We've got about 7 minutes left, I think, before the next session. So just a couple of follow-up questions. Firstly, to Rebecca. So you were focusing very much on the role of the International Court of Justice with this example of the climate case, but there are many that criticize, the International Court of Justice, saying, well, it's not binding on states. There's only 74 countries have actually accepted the compulsory jurisdiction. Powerful countries, even if they have accepted, sometimes then walked away. So can you say, are these cases, do they have impact, or are they just like similar to political statements?
Thanks so much, Alyn. And yes, I think that this is probably the biggest bugaboo when it comes to international law writ large, and specifically with the ICJ, as well as to some extent the International Criminal Court and other courts and tribunals that lack enforcement mechanisms, that there is no global police that goes after malactors and wrongdoers and to enforce decisions. But our little exploration and scholarship has found that by and large, most of the decisions of the International Court of Justice are implemented in whole and part. That's a little bit murky because often the decisions are nuanced. They reflect compromise. But in many cases, they mitigate conflict. For example, a case, Chad v. Libya, that prevented an escalating conflict from going further over a contested piece of mineral and resource-rich territory. They also, even when not implemented or not accepted even by the quote-unquote losing party, can have massive political and diplomatic repercussions. And here we can take the example of a powerful case that my country was involved in many moons ago, Nicaragua v. United States, 1984, where the United States was found to run afoul of international law by funding Contras in Nicaragua and indeed throughout Latin America. And that ran contrary to the principle of sovereignty as enshrined in the UN Charter and numerous other treaty documents and customary international law. Now, the United States said quite explicitly and unambiguously that it was not going to respect this decision of the court. And as a little fun fact or ironic piece of trivia for those who watch such things, one of the backbench supporting the Department of Justice of the United States in that case later became the president of the Court of the International Court of Justice, Judge Joan Donoghue. But while the United States said it wouldn't accept the decision, what happened was that it raised the visibility of the issue, both in the domestic political consciousness and also the public pressure worldwide against the United States to change its course. And so you then had litigation in the United States courts and tribunals and federal court, including by the organization or an amalgamation of the organization that Alyn now leads and that I recently led, that took the case to a federal district court. And ultimately, the United States changed its policies. And whether one can draw a direct line from point A of the ICJ decision to point B of that change policy, a little bit unclear, but I think it was completely significant. And Alyn can speak much better than I, and I know I'm abusing my time here, to the impact of the court, for example, in advisory opinions on nuclear testing. And what we've now seen in the climate change advisory opinion follows directly there too. And again, the advisory opinion on nuclear weapons testing, or on whaling for that matter, you didn't necessarily, in a contentious case in the latter, you didn't necessarily see the outcome writ in black and white, but you saw the effects ripple from and reverberate from the court's action, either in a contentious dispute or an advisory opinion like we saw yesterday.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. And I did put a link in the chat with ICJ success stories, which talks about the Nicaragua versus United States, plus some other ones where the less powerful countries have won against more powerful countries. The more powerful countries have indicated that they're not going to go along with it, but actually they have ended up going along with it. So there are a number of cases like that. I see Donato's got his hand up, and then we have one more question before to wrap up. Donato, very briefly, because we have one more question.
So I wanted to link up to the very useful presentation of Rebecca, and the importance of the advisory or non-binding rulings of the ICJ or any other international court, let's say, not many others, but the ICJ in particular, I think is extremely important. I mean, first of all, binding or not binding, nowadays, if we freeze the time as we are right now, does not make any difference because, as you know, the majority of states do not conform to binding resolutions or binding rules of international law. The second is that in any case, they represent customary international law. They are a foundation of customary international law because they're based on customary international law. So the importance of these rulings, and in particular, something that deals with the environmental transition, with the respect for the environment, respect and mutual assistance in this case, that is extremely important for small island states and other states that are threatened. And not only, I repeat, not only states, but the populations, the people, because that is actually even more important than the state's boundary themselves. So this, I think, is extremely important. Administrations go. What does not go, stays and goes. What does not go is the ethical standard. So if an ethical standard that is based on customary rule and human rights will remain for generations to come. So I really feel that a decision of this kind, as you said, is a milestone, a groundbreaking kind of ruling that will remain for many, many years from now. So you're right to pinpoint that this is an extremely important decision for the well-being of humanity, I would like to say.
Thanks, Donato. We've come to time, but the actual next session doesn't start for another 10 minutes. So maybe if we can keep chatting a little bit longer before they cut us off, because I see Rebecca would like to give a contribution. And then I have a very rapid fire question to ask everyone. Rebecca?
Thanks, Alyn. Yes, I just wanted to emphasize the point that the court made yesterday that the obligations ergo omnes, so owed to all states, not just to an injured state party, derive from customary international law, not just treaty law. So they're binding on non-states parties to core environmental treaties. I'm coming to you from the United States. I also just wanted to point out, I think it's Arthur's comment in the chat about the importance of the parliamentary role in this equation. We talk a lot about the executive branch that negotiates the diplomatic agreements in New York or Geneva. We've been talking about the judiciary, but we often leave the legislature out of this dialogue, and it's absolutely indispensable, not only in domesticating the opinions and jurisprudence of international courts and tribunals and executing the diplomatic agreements. But really in fulfilling its full representative, legislative and oversight obligations to all of these goals of common security and global mutual interdependence. And here, I brought up just the other day, Arthur, in a conversation about the Pact for the Future implementation follow-up, that there's a dashboard now that of the 54 core actions in the Pact itself, and then I think it comes up to 80 when you add the actions in its 2 annexes. So many of those, it's just put in the dashboard that this is going to be a member state responsibility. Well, what does that actually mean? That means the legislature, right? That means the parliament. And so how can we connect a parliamentary, indeed inter-parliamentary approach to these conversations and these negotiations and these processes that are mostly in New York, Geneva, et cetera. And so I'd love to pick up with the IPU, among others, on that conversation.
Thank you so much for emphasising the importance of parliamentarians, the legislative process. And of course, this is at all levels. Inter-Parliamentary Union is bringing parliamentarians together from across different jurisdictions to be able to share good practice, to be able to join, have cooperative action, learn from each other and support each other. But we also look coming down at the sub-national level, the real importance of mayors and councillors, and you know the world now really is working at multiple levels, from the individual human security through the local, through national, regional and international, and all of these can work together. So really important to have legislators at all levels. We haven't been cut off yet, so I just want to allude to one thing that Rebecca sort of also mentioned. There are attacks on multilateralism at the moment. There are attacks from powerful vested interests, against progressive policies, attacks against the International Criminal Court, attacks against the UN. But is multilateralism still alive? Is it resilient? Are things like the Pact for the Future, which was adopted by consensus, are things like the decision that came from the International Court of Justice yesterday, are they indications that multilateralism is still strong, it's still embedded in our common humanity, and will survive these attacks? Very quickly, in 30 seconds, is multilateralism still alive? Do we have a future for common security? Let's go with Bertylle first.
Well, that's definitely a difficult question to answer right away, but representing younger generations here, I really want to be hopeful that there are already solutions that exist, and hopefully other nations can get inspired by that and actually take action, especially because common security and human security are frameworks that are quite broad and easily sort of applicable. So I really want to remain optimistic to our future. And the decision from yesterday was one step closer to that.
Thanks, Bertylle. David?
Direct answer to your direct question, multilateralism exists, but we need to define what we mean by multilateralism. Multilateralism, as I was speaking yesterday, is not an organization, it's a mindset. So multilateralism does exist, but in smaller groups. You have the BRICS, the EU, ASEAN, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What is being neglected or not used is a multilateralism that begat a universal organization. And therein lies the confusion in people's minds. When they say multilateralism, they think UN. No, the UN is an organization. Multilateralism is a mindset. And it was multilateralism that created the UN. And it is the absence of the multilateral mindset that has now put the UN in dire straits. So it does exist. And just a quick point on 2 points quickly on what regarding parliaments and so on. I know. I can't hear you, but I can see your gestures. There is a disconnect. The United Nations deals with the executive branches of governments, of countries, member states, not with parliaments. And we are making an effort to deal with parliaments, but it is the executive branch. However, it is the parliaments that domesticate the laws. And lastly, we need to get the most powerful countries to and who have a special responsibility for peace and security as permanent members to stop going against the UN Charter and stop, give a decent example to the rest of the member states of the United Nations organization.
Thanks, David. Turn to Rebecca.
Thanks, Alyn. Well, I've put in the chat an opinion piece that I cannot claim any credit for, but I think that the title summarizes my own views, which is in defense of reformed multilateralism. So we cannot take the institutions that are human-made, indeed man-made, let's put it that way, honestly, 80 years ago as preserved in ember and too brittle to touch lest they break. In fact, it's baked into the UN Charter that this is a work in progress. Harry Truman, in his remarks to the concluding conference in San Francisco, where we celebrated the milestone just a couple months ago, made certain to reaffirm to all of those present that this was going to be the job of generations to revisit. And I think we might have lost sight of that somewhere along the way. We talked a little bit about the Pact for the Future. We didn't have time to talk about the UN 80 agenda, which also represents perhaps an opportunity, but also maybe some red flags or some risks for the future course of the United Nations and indeed the global governance project on which common security rests. And by that, I look toward the potential to preface cost saving and efficiency over effectiveness and cooperation with having a perhaps short to medium term view as opposed to longitudinal view that is truly necessary to achieve effective multilateralism. So I'll end there.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. And Donato, I think you have 1 minute before we'll be cut off and this will revert to the main session. Donato?
Let me say that with a touch of idealism and a lot of realism, we can very much pursue the interest of humanity. There is common security, there is human security. So if I'm cut off here, it's good enough. But all I want to say is that we have to work towards that achievement with gradual tension reduction, with renewed international cooperation, local cooperation, and human relations. So if we build a different level of human relations with this cultural shift that I was referring to, that is the central point of the peace offensive, we may achieve something for the present and the future generations together. Thank you, Alyn.
Thank you so much, Donato, Rebecca, Bertylle, and David, for this conversation. And thank you to the World Academy for Arts and Sciences for providing the space to have this discussion, complementary to many of the other discussions that have been taking place as part of this online assembly of the World Academy of Arts and Sciences. And with that, it's 4 o'clock, and I think we're going to be taken to the main session and continue conversations in other rooms. Thank you so much, everyone.